If you've ever had any kind of introduction to export controls, then you've surely heard that there are multiple sets of rules that apply, and that it can be quite frustrating to figure out which rules to follow. In this first video, we're going to try to make it simple for you and explain which rules will govern your exports. So let's dive in. In the US, there are 3 sets of rules that deal specifically with the licensing of exports, and we like to think of these sets of rules as 3 buckets, which when taken together contain just about everything you can think of that might be exported from the US. The first bucket is the smallest, and it deals with the rules of the US Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This bucket is the smallest because the rules deal only with stuff related to atomic energy. This bucket of rules is outside the scope of what we're going to deal with in this training because it's unlikely to come up with the overwhelming majority of space industry businesses. Instead, we're going to focus on the next 2 buckets. Up next, we have the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, or the ITAR. This bucket of rules deals with things that are often military specific, such as rockets and satellites. All of the things that the ITAR deal with will be on a list called the US Munitions List. And if a thing is listed on the US Munitions List, then it will definitely be subject to the ITAR. Now, although I just said that things controlled by the ITAR tend to be military related, you should just go ahead and forget this distinction. This is because you should never, ever say to yourself, I don't think this thing is controlled by the ITAR because I don't think it has a military purpose. Instead, the only factor that determines whether something is controlled by the ITAR is whether it is listed on the US Munitions List. That's it. And frankly, there are some counterintuitive things listed there. For example, it's not just military-style rockets that are listed on the US Munitions List. In fact, the US Munitions List includes model rockets that you might buy on Amazon.com or at your local hobby store if those model rockets have certain characteristics. For this reason, you should never try to use your own reasoning when determining whether something is controlled by the ITAR. Instead, just look in the US Munitions List. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the Export Administration Regulations, or the EAR. This is the biggest bucket because it essentially deals with everything that doesn't fall into the first 2 buckets. Most of the things that the EAR bucket deal with are totally boring, mundane things that don't warrant any kind of special control. For example, bicycles fall into the EAR bucket. The US government isn't particularly concerned about the export of bicycles. In fact, you won't find bicycles on any kind of a list in the EAR. But we know that bicycles belong in the EAR bucket because they aren't listed in any of the other regulatory schemes. In this way, the EAR is kind of a catch-all regulatory scheme. We have a special name for these things that aren't listed anywhere in the EAR, and also aren't in any of the other regulatory schemes, and we call these things EAR 99. The overwhelming majority of things that are governed by the EAR are going to be classified as EAR 99 because they aren't listed anywhere. Bicycles, toothpicks, toilet paper, dish soap, most things you can think of are EAR 99. If a thing is EAR 99, you usually won't need any kind of a license from the US government to export it, although there are some very narrow instances in which you might. For example, if you want to export an EAR 99 item to North Korea, you will need a license first. Otherwise, the rules for EAR 99 items are pretty easy. Although most things that fall into the EAR bucket are EAR 99 and subject to very relaxed rules, the EAR do contain a list of things that have stronger rules applied to them. And this list is called the Commerce Control List. For example, certain kinds of satellite ground stations are included on the Commerce Control List. The US government might want to apply stricter rules to the export of these ground stations because they don't want you to help foreign governments expand their space capabilities. Now, if you've spent any time on the internet looking up export control rules, you might have seen people say that the Commerce Control List is only dual-use items, meaning items that have both a military and a commercial purpose. This is not true. Some of the things on the Commerce Control List are dual use, but there are a lot of other things on the Commerce Control List that certainly aren't dual use, And you won't be able to figure out what's on the Commerce Control List simply by thinking about whether a thing might have both military and commercial capabilities. For example, horses are on the Commerce Control List. And it's not because the US is trying to prevent China from acquiring military horse technology. Instead, it's because horses are sometimes exported to be turned into hamburger meat, and some US politicians don't like that. So, just like the US munitions list, the Commerce Control List is also counterintuitive. For the sake of driving this point home, let's look at a few more unexpected things that are on the Commerce Control List. So again, we just mentioned horses, but funnily enough, horses are only on the Commerce Control List when they are transported by sea. Next, there's a kind of wood called Western red cedar that's on the Commerce Control List. Now, obviously, Western red cedar doesn't have any sort of a military purpose, so it's not a dual-use item. Next, certain petroleum products, such as paraffin wax, are on the list. Paraffin wax is the stuff that candles and crayons are made out of, and it's just about the most boring substance you can think of. Certain video game consoles will sometimes be on the Commerce Control List. When the PlayStation 2 came out in the late 90s, it fit the specs of certain high-performance computers that were on the Commerce Control List. And although the list has been updated since then and the PlayStation 2 no longer meets the updated specs, gaming technology tends to advance really quickly, and it's entirely possible that the upcoming generations of video game consoles could get caught on the Commerce Control List. Life jackets are on the list. Yes, the same life jackets that you can buy at Walmart that you wear when you go fishing. Those are on the Commerce Control List. So remember, the point we're trying to drive home here is that you won't be able to just guess what's on the Commerce Control List or the US munitions list just by thinking about the purpose of the thing that you're trying to classify. Instead, you always have to look at the lists to see if your thing is on there. In the past, we've heard so many clients say something like, hey, it's not like we're exporting weapons, so surely these rules don't apply to us. If that thought ever crosses your mind, just remember that life jackets and the stuff that crayons are made out of are on the Commerce Control List. So maybe you should double check before being dismissive. That's it for this video. We'll see you in the next one.